The courtroom was electric before Jasmine Crockett even stepped through the door. Flashbulbs popped as cameras from every network trained their lenses on her. Murmurs swirled like a storm around the rows of spectators, each one sensing the weight of history pressing down. Crockett walked with purpose, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor, each step a deliberate beat in the tense rhythm of accountability. Her eyes scanned the room not with arrogance, but with the steady confidence of someone who had prepared for this moment for months, perhaps years. She carried the burden of confronting one of the most influential voices in modern media. Tucker Carlson. The public knew him as a provocateur, a commentator whose words could shift millions of minds. What they didn't know was the hidden machinery behind those words, the strategy that had quietly manipulated narratives, stoked division, and influenced policy without ever being questioned. The judge's gavel struck, slicing through the murmurs. Like a blade, and silence fell. Crockett's legal team had been meticulously preparing evidence, leaked memos, internal communications, and archived broadcasts that suggested a coordinated effort to sway public opinion. She could feel the energy in the room, the charged expectation of a nation watching through screens, waiting for the moment the veil would be lifted. Cameras focused on the opposing counsel, whose smug confidence had yet to meet Crockett's resolute gaze. This was not a typical legal battle. This was a moral confrontation with far-reaching implications. As she approached the podium, Crockett's mind raced through her opening remarks. Every word would matter, every pause strategically measured to resonate with both the jury and the millions watching remotely. She began with a calm, commanding tone, immediately establishing the stakes. For years, the American public has been exposed to commentary presented as news, carefully curated to manipulate perception, not inform. Her voice cut through the stillness, echoing against the high ceilings. The camera panned to the gallery, capturing whispers, gasps, and the intense focus of journalists scribbling notes at lightning speed. The narrative tension was palpable. Crockett unveiled the first pieces of her evidence, a series of broadcast segments paired with internal memos that suggested messaging had been intentionally aligned with political events. Every slide, every quote was a hammer striking at the foundations of perceived impartiality. The courtroom leaned forward collectively, sensing that what had seemed like opinion was part of a deliberate, calculated strategy. She didn't just speak to the room. She spoke to the nation, reminding them that media influence had consequences, tangible and immediate, in real communities across America. By the end of her opening salvo, Crockett had done more than capture attention. She had shifted the atmosphere from tense anticipation to urgent focus. The judge's eyes narrowed, the opposing counsel shifted uneasily, and the spectators, both in the room and at home, realized they were witnessing the first act of a high-stakes confrontation that could redefine accountability in media. Every word, every gesture, was setting the stage for a battle that was just beginning. The courtroom hummed with quiet tension as Jasmine Crockett prepared to reveal the core of her case. This was the moment where abstract accusations would take form in undeniable evidence, and the air seemed to thrum with expectation. Crockett's gaze swept over the jury, the judge, and the assembled media, each observer holding their collective breath. What she was about to expose wasn't just a pattern of commentary. It was a meticulously crafted strategy, executed behind the curtain of public opinion. She began with a series of broadcast clips, each one carefully curated to show how Carlson's messaging had consistently aligned with specific political narratives. The clips played silently for the court, but their impact was loud, visual, and immediate. Crockett's narration rose above the hush, her words cinematic and precise. These broadcasts were not isolated opinions. They were calibrated to target fears, amplify division, and shape perception. Each example revealed subtle, yet intentional framing, choice of language, selective omission, timing of segments. The courtroom audience felt it in their bones, the undeniable artistry of manipulation laid bare. Crockett paused, letting the weight of the evidence settle. Then she introduced internal documents obtained from credible sources, redacted but telling. Charts, memos, and communications illustrated a strategy designed to maximize engagement, polarize audiences, and influence political discourse, all without appearing overtly manipulative. The opposing counsel shifted in their seat, a flicker of unease crossing their composed exterior. The judge's expression remained neutral, but his eyes betrayed a spark of curiosity and concern. As she delved deeper, Crockett connected the dots. Between broadcast segments, internal directives, and public reactions. Graphs visualizing viewer engagement, demographic targeting, and social media amplification revealed the precision of Carlson's approach. Every example built a narrative of deliberate strategy rather than casual opinion, highlighting the ethical and political stakes at hand. "This is not mere commentary," she intoned, her voice firm but calm. "This is influence engineered to move millions, subtly, invisibly, shaping beliefs and decisions without public awareness." She transitioned to the human dimension of the strategy, recounting public reactions and the social consequences of polarizing messaging. Families divided, communities stirred, debates inflamed, all traced back to carefully timed narratives and selective framing. The courtroom absorbed the gravity of these revelations. Spectators leaned forward, journalists scribbled feverishly, and the tension crackled like static in the charged air. By the chapter's end, Crockett had achieved more than presenting evidence. She had crafted a story of cause and effect, demonstrating how behind-the-scenes decisions shaped public discourse. The courtroom felt the pressure mounting, the stakes rising. The judge's hand hovered over the gavel, the opposing counsel's composure waned, and the gallery remained silent, captivated. Crockett's eyes met theirs all, unwavering, a silent promise echoing in every gesture. The truth would not remain hidden, and the secret strategy would be fully exposed in the chapters to come. The courtroom felt heavier as Jasmine Crockett shifted the focus from strategy to consequence. What had begun as a meticulous presentation of media tactics now became painfully human. She painted a vivid picture of ordinary Americans caught in the crossfire of orchestrated narratives, their daily lives shaped by unseen forces. Families arguing over politics at dinner tables, neighbors turning on one another, communities fractured by fear and misunderstanding, all traced back to the invisible hand of carefully timed broadcasts. Crockett's voice, calm yet charged, with moral clarity, underscored the stakes. When media power is wielded without accountability, it ceases to inform and begins to manipulate. People's trust, their communities, their very sense of reality is at risk. She presented public testimonials from individuals who had been misled, frightened, or angered by polarizing broadcasts. Each anecdote was grounded in real reports and social media commentary, carefully woven into the narrative to heighten emotional resonance. The courtroom, usually a space of clinical neutrality, seemed alive with empathy. Spectators shifted in their seats, some visibly moved, others silently contemplating the unseen consequences in their own lives. Every story was a thread in a tapestry of influence and impact, illustrating that Carlson's strategy was more than words. It was a force shaping society. Crockett then tied these personal consequences to larger political outcomes. The clips, internal communications, and demographic data she had previously presented were now contextualized within the broader scope of civic engagement, voting patterns, and public opinion. She showed how carefully crafted messaging had coincided with pivotal political moments, subtly nudging audiences toward particular viewpoints without their conscious awareness. The narrative crescendoed as she outlined the ethical implications. Influence wielded without transparency erodes democracy itself. Throughout, Crockett's courtroom demeanor blended intensity with composure. Her gestures were precise, her pauses deliberate, and her gaze unwavering. Every line of dialogue, though few, was delivered with piercing emotional weight. "These are not abstract statistics," she said, locking eyes with the opposing counsel. "These are real people, real communities, real consequences." The room absorbed the gravity of her words. Even the judge leaned forward, as if feeling the societal ripples she described, while reporters typed furiously, capturing the moral weight of her argument. By the end of the chapter, the courtroom atmosphere had transformed. What began as a technical analysis of broadcast strategy had evolved into a profound examination of ethical responsibility, public accountability, and human cost. Crockett's presentation had succeeded not only in exposing hidden patterns, but in connecting those patterns to the lives they touched. The audience, both present and watching remotely, understood the enormity of the confrontation. This was more than a legal proceeding, it was a reckoning. And the next phase promised even more revelations. The air in the courtroom shifted when Jasmine Crockett called forward her first anonymous source. Though the whistleblower's identity remained confidential, their testimony carried the weight of insider knowledge, a glimpse behind the polished facade of one of America's most influential media voices. Crockett's voice, steady yet commanding, filled the room. "What I am about to present is not speculation. It is testimony from someone who has seen firsthand how strategy overrides objectivity, how influence is engineered deliberately." The spectators leaned in. Journalists stopped typing, and even the opposing counsel's confident posture faltered slightly. The whistleblower's account detailed internal planning sessions, editorial calendars, and audience segmentation strategies that had never been intended for public view. Each revelation was carefully framed by Crockett's narration, highlighting the subtlety and precision of the tactics. The audience learned how specific topics were chosen, not merely for interest, but for impact, designed to provoke emotional reactions, amplify division, and subtly shape beliefs. Every scheduling decision, every choice of wording, and every timing adjustment was a calculated maneuver. The courtroom felt like it was watching a game of invisible chess unfold before their eyes. Crockett's questioning was precise, measured, yet relentless. "You're telling this court that broadcasts were coordinated with internal directives to influence public opinion?" she asked. The testimony confirmed it, describing emails, notes, and internal discussions that mapped messaging to political calendars. The opposing counsel attempted to interject, framing these tactics as standard editorial planning, but Crockett countered with undeniable detail. Her voice carried moral authority as she emphasized the difference between editorial judgment and orchestrated influence, her eyes scanning the gallery, connecting each word with the weight of consequence. Visual evidence punctuated the testimony. Redacted memos, charts of audience engagement, and timeline diagrams appeared on screens, illustrating correlations between messaging and public reaction. The courtroom collectively absorbed the pattern. What appeared spontaneous on air was, in reality, a calculated strategy executed with meticulous care. Crockett's narration wove together these technical details with cinematic tension, painting a picture of deliberate orchestration without losing sight of the human and societal. Stakes. By the chapter's end, the whistleblower's revelations had escalated the tension to a near breaking point. The gallery murmured, the judge's eyes narrowed in focus, and the opposing counsel's composure wavered under the weight of exposure. Crockett's strategy had succeeded. The courtroom and the audience at large now faced the undeniable reality that Carlson's media influence was not accidental or opinion-driven. It was engineered. The stage was set for the next chapter, where Crockett would confront ideological defenses and challenge the very ethics underpinning the unchecked power of broadcast media. Every participant, both present and watching, understood the magnitude of what was unfolding. This was no longer a debate, but a moral reckoning. The courtroom air thickened as opposing counsel rose, attempting to defend Carlson with a familiar refrain: free speech and journalistic independence. Crockett's eyes never wavered. She knew the subtle art of argument, how to dismantle ideology without losing sight of humanity. The tension between moral accountability and the defensive influence hung over the room like a storm cloud, electric and waiting to strike. Crockett leaned slightly forward, her voice measured yet unwavering. "We are not questioning the right to speak," she said, each word deliberate. "We are questioning the deliberate use of speech to manipulate, divide, and mislead. There is a line between commentary and calculated influence, and that line has been crossed." The opposing counsel countered quickly, invoking the protections of journalistic freedom, emphasizing editorial judgment and audience engagement. But Crockett, armed with meticulous evidence, wove each rebuttal seamlessly into the narrative she had been constructing. She presented additional data and prior testimony to demonstrate that Carlson's content was strategically synchronized with political events, designed not merely to inform, but to provoke, polarize, and manipulate. The courtroom watched, captivated by the ideological duel, as the abstract concept of media influence became a concrete moral and legal confrontation. Crockett highlighted the ethical implications of the strategy, emphasizing that it wasn't just a question of professional conduct, it was a societal issue. She recounted instances where public perception, fueled by manipulated broadcasts, had influenced policy debates and public behavior. Each anecdote, grounded in real reports, added weight to her argument. The gallery leaned forward, the journalists paused, and even the judge's expression grew taut with concentration. This was not a theoretical exercise. It was a reckoning with the power of words and their consequences. She punctuated her points with calculated pauses, allowing the gravity of each revelation to sink in. "This is about accountability," Crockett stated, her voice both calm and piercing. "When influence is exercised without transparency, without integrity, the public suffers. Democracy suffers. Communities suffer." Her words resonated beyond the walls of the courtroom, reaching every person watching through a screen, connecting the dots between abstract manipulation and tangible human impact. As the chapter drew to a close, the courtroom remained suspended in tension. Opposing counsel struggled to maintain their confident facade, while Crockett's presence exuded authority, moral clarity, and precision. The ideological clash had been escalated, framing the debate not as politics or free speech, but as the ethical responsibility of media power. The audience understood that this confrontation was not just about evidence, it was about principle, accountability, and the integrity of public discourse. The next chapter promised to expose even deeper layers of manipulation, as Crockett prepared to reveal the intricate data, timing, and audience-targeting strategies that had enabled Carlson's influence to reach its full impact. The courtroom lights seemed to dim as Jasmine Crockett shifted the focus to data, timing, and the subtle mechanics of media manipulation. The air was thick with anticipation, the audience sensing that the abstract ethical debate was about to collide with hard, undeniable evidence. Crockett stood poised, her presence commanding, as screens lit up behind her with graphs, charts, and timelines that mapped out Carlson's broadcasts against political events. Every spike in viewership, every calculated segment release, told a story that words alone could not convey. Her narration was cinematic, dramatic, precise. This is not conjecture. This is measurable influence, orchestrated with intent. Every segment, every guest, every phrasing was chosen to maximize impact at the exact moment it would sway perception. She clicked through slides showing correlations between political events and broadcast timings, audience engagement analytics, and social media amplification. The courtroom leaned in as the patterns became impossible to ignore. What had seemed like spontaneous commentary was revealed as a sophisticated, calculated strategy designed to manipulate public opinion with surgical precision. Opposing counsel attempted to interrupt, framing these patterns as natural outcomes of popular programming. Crockett, unshaken, wove the evidence seamlessly into her narrative. She highlighted emails, internal discussions, and public responses that mapped to the broadcast's precise timing. Every example reinforced a pattern, influence engineered, carefully measured, and executed to perfection. The courtroom reacted with audible murmurs as the reality of the orchestration sank in. Even the judge's attention sharpened, each line of evidence pressing the ethical and legal stakes into the room's atmosphere. Crockett had humanized the data. Graphs and charts became more than numbers. They became a reflection of societal impact. She narrated instances where specific broadcasts coincided with spikes in public anger, division in communities, or policy debates. A manipulation was not abstract, it had tangible consequences. Families argued, communities polarized, and political discourse shifted, all subtly guided by strategic content timing. The courtroom gallery absorbed this revelation with a mix of disbelief and awe, journalists capturing the tension and spectators silently weighing the moral ramifications. The chapter concluded with Crockett delivering a final, powerful line that resonated both in the room and beyond. This is influence weaponized, not for truth, not for discourse, but for manipulation. And today, we hold it to account. The courtroom felt the weight of those words. Opposing counsel's earlier confidence wavered. The judge's gaze was intense, and the audience, both present and remote, recognized that the stakes had just escalated. The next chapter promised the ultimate confrontation, where Carlson's team would be forced onto the defensive, and the ethical, legal, and emotional threads of the case would collide in dramatic revelation. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as Tucker Carlson's representatives finally rose to respond. Confidence had once defined their posture, but now a subtle tension betrayed their uncertainty. They invoked journalistic freedom, asserting editorial discretion and the right to shape opinion. Yet the room, charged with anticipation, sensed the confrontation was no longer abstract. It had become a battle over morality, responsibility, and the boundaries of influence. Crockett's eyes locked on the opposing counsel, unwavering and sharp, as if daring them to challenge her with anything beyond rhetoric. She began her rebuttal with measured intensity, each word carefully chosen to dismantle the ideological defenses. "You can claim editorial judgment," she said, her voice steady. "But when strategy is used to manipulate public perception, influence votes, and deepen societal division, it becomes something far beyond commentary. It becomes a deliberate force with consequences." Her words cut through the courtroom, carrying moral clarity and a cinematic weight that drew gasps from the gallery and made even the judge lean forward. Crockett then presented further evidence, layering clips, internal communications, and audience data in a methodical display that exposed inconsistencies in Carlson's public statements. Each contradiction was a drumbeat, heightening tension, each revelation a spark that set the room alight. She illustrated how segments were synchronized with political developments, amplified through social media, and designed to provoke specific emotional responses. The courtroom could feel the invisible strings being pulled, guiding the audience. Like pieces on a chessboard, her questioning was sharp and unrelenting. "Are these mere coincidences or deliberate orchestration?" she asked, letting the pause stretch, letting the weight of logic and ethics sink in. The opposing counsel attempted to deflect, but Crockett countered with evidence that left little room for ambiguity. Every slide, every recorded clip, every chart underscored the precision of the strategy, forcing the courtroom to acknowledge a stark reality. Influence had been weaponized. The narrative then shifted to the human and societal dimension. Crockett connected the timing and strategy to real-world consequences. Families divided by fear, communities destabilized, and public discourse manipulated. Her narration wove these threads into cinematic imagery, giving life to statistics, making data tangible, and transforming abstract influence into human impact. Each anecdote landed like a hammer, punctuating the courtroom's attention with moral weight. By the chapter's end, the courtroom was electric with tension. Opposing counsel, though still professional, bore the subtle signs of being on the defensive. The judge's expression reflected deep consideration, and the gallery seemed caught between awe and shock. Crockett's presence radiated authority, clarity, and moral conviction. The ideological clash had escalated to its zenith, setting the stage for the next chapter. Public reactions, media fallout, and the mounting pressure that would push the confrontation toward its climactic revelation. The audience, both present and watching remotely, understood that the story was entering its most critical phase, the unmasking of influence at its core. Outside the courtroom, the world seemed to hold its breath. News outlets scrambled to cover every nuance of Crockett's revelations. Social media lit up with commentary, and millions watched from living rooms, offices, and cafes across the nation. Inside, Crockett's words had already set a ripple through the room, but now those ripples were becoming waves. The audience could feel the intensity of public scrutiny pressing in, the gravity of accountability stretching far beyond the marble walls. Every journalist's camera, every blinking light, and every tapping keyboard was a reminder that this confrontation was no longer confined to legal boundaries. It had become a national spectacle. Crockett's narration drew the courtroom and viewers alike into the wider implications of the strategy she had exposed. Graphs and reports previously shown as internal evidence were now contextualized against real-world public reactions. Social media spikes coinciding with broadcasts, polarizing discussions erupting in forums and comment sections, and communities, reacting emotionally to narratives carefully curated for maximum impact. This is not conjecture or partisan exaggeration, Crockett said quietly but firmly, her eyes scanning the room, connecting everyone present to the larger story. This is influence in action, designed, measured, and deployed with precision. The statement echoed like a warning and a call to action. Visual storytelling punctuated the tension. Clips of news reports, online debates, and viral segments played in sequence, showing how public perception shifted in subtle but measurable ways. The courtroom watched, rapt, as data and lived experience collided. Families divided, workplaces fractured, and political rhetoric escalated, all under the invisible hand of calculated messaging. Crockett humanized each statistic, ensuring the audience understood that real people bore the weight of these orchestrated strategies. Inside the courtroom, the energy was palpable. The judge leaned forward, absorbing not just the facts, but the societal implications. The opposing counsel's confident composure began to crack under the dual pressure of evidence and public attention. Every reporter's note-taking, every camera flash, every whispered conversation in the gallery amplified the urgency of Crockett's narrative. She had not only presented evidence, she had contextualized it, transforming dry memos and broadcast clips into a compelling, morally resonant story that demanded attention. By the end of the chapter, the courtroom was a microcosm of the nation at large, tense, emotionally charged, and collectively grappling with the implications of hidden media influence. Crockett had successfully bridged the gap between legal argument and public consciousness, making clear that accountability was not just a courtroom matter, it was a societal imperative. The stage was now set for the next, most explosive chapter, the climactic confrontation where the orchestrated strategy would be challenged head-on, and the consequences for both media and democracy would be laid bare. The audience, both present and remote, felt the suspense like a physical weight. The final showdown was imminent, and nothing would remain hidden. The courtroom fell into a tense, almost suffocating silence. Jasmine Crockett stood at the center, a figure of calm authority, as the moment she had been building toward for months arrived, the climactic confrontation. Every eye in the room was fixed on her, every camera lens zoomed in, capturing the weight of anticipation. This was the culmination of meticulous research, whistleblower testimony, and carefully documented evidence, a public reckoning of influence, strategy, and accountability. The air seemed to crackle with suspense, as if the very walls of the courtroom were holding their breath. Crockett began with a steady, unwavering voice. Today, we lay bare a strategy designed not merely to comment, but to manipulate, not to inform, but to sway. And it is my duty to show this court and the nation that influence has been weaponized. Her words resonated with cinematic clarity, each syllable striking the courtroom like a gavel of moral authority. She unveiled the final pieces of evidence: synchronized broadcast timings, internal memos, demographic targeting charts, and social media amplification strategies, all demonstrating the orchestration behind what had seemed like spontaneous commentary. The opposing counsel attempted to interject, their voice tight, confident yet strained, invoking journalistic independence. Crockett, unflinching, countered with a series of questions that pierced the defense like a scalpel. "Do you deny that segments were timed to coincide with political events?" she asked. "Do you deny that internal directives guided audience perception deliberately?" The room remained silent, the weight of truth pressing down. Her questioning left little room for equivocation. The evidence, combined with her piercing narration, created an undeniable narrative of deliberate influence. Crockett then tied the technical evidence back to human impact, her narration cinematic, evocative, and precise. She described families divided by misinformation, communities polarized by calculated rhetoric, and political debates subtly shaped by orchestrated broadcasts. Each visual, each anecdote, reinforced the stakes of the confrontation, transforming abstract strategy into real-world consequence. The courtroom gallery leaned forward collectively, their attention rapt, the journalists' pens moving feverishly to capture every revelation. By the chapter's end, the courtroom felt the gravity of what had been exposed. The judge's expression was solemn, reflecting the societal implications of the strategy laid bare. Opposing counsel's confident facade had cracked, and the gallery, charged with suspense, waited to see how accountability would unfold. Crockett had successfully turned evidence into moral clarity, strategy into spectacle, and commentary into consequence. The stage was set for the final chapter, where poetic justice would be realized, and the public would see the full weight of truth, accountability, and ethical responsibility in media. Every participant, both in the room and watching remotely, understood that this confrontation was historic, and the climax had delivered the moral and intellectual reckoning they had been waiting for.